Thank you, Lars. Yeah, so doing the first talk after lunch is always hard. But I think it's worth that you don't fall into sleep mode, because we might talk about some interesting topics. Because when you are working with AM, you usually also work on component development, and we at Adobe do also some component development, and we have now created a new project for new core components, and this topic we want to cover during this presentation. So, short introduction of ourselves. As you can see at this picture, we are very serious guys, and we are part of the Rev Squad Scrum team at Adobe. We are responsible for doing some reference implementation or demo application. If you had already the chance to work with AM 6.3 or 6.2, you have maybe noticed this new demo retail, which is this commerce application which is now shipped with AM. And with AM 6.3, we are now getting farther and farther to also showcase best practice in component development with this retail application. So let's dive into the agenda of our presentation. I would first like to talk a little bit about the history of component development in AEM and what we have learned during the years and stages. And then I will hand over to Vlad, who will give you then an overview of the new core components. And then we are going to break the golden rule of technical presentation, because we are doing 2 live demos. So I ask you all to keep the finger crossed that it will work. And in the end, we have also a conclusion and give you some advice how you can get started with the new core components. So components and web content management systems are tightly coupled. When I started AM development 5 years ago, the component concept was already familiar for me, because components is a very common pattern if you do content management systems. Usually you have just a static HTML snippet and some properties you want to inject into your components, and then you build your static HTML output file. But this has probably changed during the last years, as you already saw with the presentation from Justin, where you have also to provide different output channels for your components. So components have now a more and more application character. So why do we develop components at Adobe, and why do we ship them with the product AM? First of all, we would like to make the customer happy, of course, and if they spend a little bit of money into an AM license, they would also probably get something where they can play with. It's like if you buy a car, you want to start to drive, and if you buy AM, you want to start websites with it. So this is one of the reasons why we think it's good to have some components within AM. And of course, we also want to showcase the latest development we did on the product and the capabilities you now have in your product. This is, I think, more interesting than read all the documentation we provide. So you can see how this new features can work in your components, and for example, now this editable template feature, which was introduced with 6.2 is one good example for this. And we don't want to reinvent the wheel on every customer project. So if you develop your first text component, you might be proud and you think, yeah, I'm now a really good AEM developer. But after the second or third component, yeah, it might be also getting bored for you. And of course, last but not least, we want to provide some guidelines of and best practice how components should be developed. And this is also for new AEM developer always a good point to have a look to our components, because then you get some feelings how component development should really work in AEM. So what components do we ship with AEM? We have this foundation components, which are coming with every AEM installation. And since 6.3, we have now this new core components. But this you will only see if you run AEM with sample content mode, and you can install them afterwards also from our public GitHub repository. So now I want to go a little bit into the history of the components, and that's why I start with the foundation components. So the foundation components were first developed with the introduction from CQ5, which was around 2008, so quite a while ago. And if you look to this foundation components, you might see the Model 1 pattern was also explained by Justin, where you see a lot of scriptlet codes into your JSPs, and it looks not really nice. And these are most of the foundation components, so you can have a look to them and you will see a lot of good examples of this style. And with AEM we ship more than 70 of these foundation components. Some of them are very special, like asset share, for example. If you want to build an asset share web page, there are some foundation components which you can reuse. But some of them are also very common, which you might also use in your customer projects, like, for example, the page component or the parsers or responsive grid. These components are very often used really in live projects. So the foundation components are placed into two locations in your JCR. So the old one, which are based on JSP, are placed in Libs foundation components. These are the ones which really started with CQ 5.0, the development of them. And then there are also some newer one, I would call it, which are placed in Libs WCM foundation components. These are already using HTL, which is our scripting language for building components, and as back-end logic, they make use of the JS use object implementation. So here you have already some separation between the markup and the logic. As I already mentioned, they are used in many customer projects, at least a common one, like the page component and parsers. And some of them are but also used in our product itself. So, for example, the page component from Foundation is also used in commerce or in some mobile parts of our product. So what are the challenges we have with the Foundation components? So as they are used by some of our customers, we can't just change them, because if you would install or upgrade a new version of AEM, you would probably break your existing application. They are directly used in your project, or at least you have inherited from them. Like the page component, this is very common that you inherit from the page component and you just change the body part of this component. So, and yeah, we have to be honestly to ourselves, they are not state of the art anymore. So at least the JSP components are really developed with a lot of logic placed inside of the JSPs as scriptlets, and for us it's really hard to write unit tests for these components, and that's also an issue we have internally. We have a lot of effort in maintaining them and to make sure that they don't break at any point. And we don't provide consistent support of the latest AEM features. If you have a look, for example, to the foundation form components and you want to use them with the new Touch UI, which is not as new anymore, yeah, we don't have this dialog features for the form components, and also the editable template feature is not really supported by these components, because when they were developed, the editable template feature was not there. So with that,
with that said, let's move on and see how we are trying to fix these issues with the core components. We already have a set of components that, as Burkhard said, were published with the 6.3. Most of them are common things that are used by anyone that's doing page authoring and web content management. We have a page, a breadcrumb, a title, text, image, a list, and a social network sharing component. We also started creating some form components as well. We have the basics, the container, the text, options, hidden fields, and the button. And we already started looking into new components, and they are published in what we call a sandbox. I'll talk a bit more about this. So we have also navigation, language-based navigation, teaser components, and also a component for searching your website. Now, the best thing we think about these core components is that they are open source. They are available on GitHub. You have access to the code. You have access to the latest developments, and we are trying really hard to keep an ongoing community there. Of course, there are two branches there. We have the stable branch, which is on master, which is targeting AEM 6.3. It also includes, from time to time, maintenance and fixes. And there's also a development branch, which is using sandbox versions of the components. These are versions of the components that we feel we wanted to share with all the community, to have a quick look at them, to see what's coming up, but they should be seen as a preview version, something to experiment with, not really use in production, because we might change them in ways that could break some of your implementations. So it's a good moment to have a look at the sandbox and see what's coming up, provide your feedback to make sure that it gets incorporated into the components before an actual release is being made of those components. And yeah, as I said, your feedback and any of your contributions are really greatly appreciated. We take some time to discuss about all the feedback. Sometimes it takes a while until we get an answer, but we want to make sure that we give the right answer. And any feedback is really appreciated from you. Of course, one of the other things that we wanted to improve together with going open source is creating more documentation for the components. This is happening at each component level, where we have README files which explain what each component is doing, what kind of markup can you expect from that component, and how it should be used. There's also more global information about some of the decisions that we took in our wiki, also on GitHub, and you can find more information about the components in the AEM docs. There's also a tutorial about starting a new website based on these components. I encourage you all to have a look at these. These are really valuable, we think, for people starting out with the core components. Also, one other thing we wanted to do is to have them tested as best as we could. That's why our plan is to offer a coverage of greater than 80% through either unit tests, which are also public and you can see them, and through UI tests. These are mostly based on ops.js, and they allow us to test the components as they are being used in a website. That allows us to test some really cool integrations, like dragging and dropping a component and configuring something on it and seeing how it displays in the browsers. So you can find the tests as well for the UI in our repo, and you can run these tests either manually from the hubs console in AEM, or you can do like we did and integrate them into an internal build pipeline to test them against multiple browsers to make sure that whatever you are changing or developing on top of these is actually working in all browsers as it's supposed to do. Now, about the technology of these core components, we went with HTL markup, which is a clean HTML-based templating language. It's been covered here before. I think everybody already found out about it, but it allows you to separate your rendering, your view, from your models using Sling models, which can be either Sling models or plain old Java objects or even JavaScript classes. It's also open source, both the specification and the implementation, which was donated to the Sling project by Adobe. And for the markup that we are generating in these components, we went with the block element module modifier notation, so that whenever you want to use one of the components, you can have a pretty good idea about how these elements in the markup can be reached through CSS selectors and modified. For example, an HTL script looks something like this. As you see, it uses a model, a title model, and we are trying to put BEM style selectors wherever we think it's relevant and you would want to customize something in the markup. The corresponding Sling model is just an interface which exposes the methods that are needed to render the output. And of course, we also provide implementations which are targeting that model, but they are also targeting a specific rendering script by using the resource type. For these components, in order to be able to evolve them through time and not being locked into a certain version like we are right now with the foundation components, we went for versioning, which is done at HTL level through path-based version. So you will find that each component in its path has its version, and inheritance is used between components, sometimes by Sling resource supertype. For Sling models, for the interfaces, we went with default methods, and for the implementations, we went with since annotation, so that you know from what version of the package this method provides. We also provide the implementation for that method. So an example would be this get text, which by default in the interface is just throwing an unsupported operation exception. But since Sling models version 11, it's gonna return a true output. This allows everyone to do some really cool things. So you can target a specific rendering component version by using the resource type annotation property in the model. So you can customize, even if your script does not differ that much between two versions of a component, you can customize how the implementation of the model works between the two versions. Also, in order to make our components more extensible, we went with a proxy pattern so that the core components, when they are installed into your AEM instance, they are hidden by default. They are not in a visible group. But what we encourage everyone is to create a proxy component by using Sling resource supertype to reference a specific version of the core component. So in that way, when we do an update and we come with something new, your website is still gonna run as expected because you are referencing a version which is not changing that much. In order to customize the components, you can either overlay the HTL script, you can change the Sling models implementation, or you can overlay and adapt the dialog tabs for the component. And one of the other patterns that we recommend is to use composition, either to assemble multiple components into a larger super component by using data slide resource to include them, or to reuse the Sling model implementation, starting with the newer versions of Sling and probably available in the next version of AEM as well. You will be able to get a reference to the super type implementation of a Sling model that you can reuse through composition so that you don't have to re-implement everything. You can just provide some change implementation for one method and reuse whatever it is in the default implementation. The core components are being used in WeRetail, which is the reference implementation for WCM and commerce. WeRetail started in AEM 6.2 as an add-on that you could install, and it was using custom components with HTL and JavaScript. It then evolved in 6.3. We started using the core components in WeRetail. We moved to HTL in Java. And for the next versions, we plan to use even more core components. To give you an example, how an entire website could be used by reusing as much as possible of the core components. And also probably we're going to move more to HTL and Sling models. For example, such a component using the proxy pattern would just define the resource supertype, in this case to be breadcrumb, and its component group to be WeRetail, so we can use it there. And now let's also see how that works in real time, right? Hopefully this demo will go as planned. I have created some demo components in a WeRetail instance. Just maximize this. I'm using the proxy pattern and have selected the resource supertype for version 1 of the list component. For now, for this component, I did not provide anything more than just the fact that it's a CQ component. It's available in the WeRetail component group. I added a title and the supertype. I'm gonna just use it in a page. Just gonna drag and drop it. Of course, it needs some configuration in order to work. I'm gonna configure it quickly. I'm gonna list all the children of WeRetail. So this is what the component renders with the default rendering script, which is coming from the core components, and the default implementation for the Sling model, which is also coming from the core components. Now we can go ahead and customize it. We can create a new script. In this case, I changed the list type to be an ordered list. I'm gonna rename this so it gets picked up by Sling. And if I refresh, our new script is gonna be picked up. So there you go. I already changed the way it is rendered, although the implementation of the model has not changed so far. I also provided a new implementation for the model in a bundle, which is installed. It's targeting the resource type. I created a separate component for that, which is called demo list. It's the same as before. It has a super type for version 1 of the list, but this one is targeted by another implementation for the Sling model, which is just gonna return 2 test items just so that we see it's working. So I'm gonna drag that as well into our page. There we go. And here, it's still using the default rendering script from the core components, but now it's picking up the implementation of the Sling model from our custom bundle by using the resource super type, the resource type of the new component, of the proxy component. So that allows us to customize the components in any way we want. We can override how the rendering is being done. We can override how data is provided to the rendering part, so that we can inject there. We can use a decorator pattern. We can change pretty much everything. With that, I'm gonna hand over to Burkhard, who also has another demo. This is just a review of what we've done before, creating a proxy component, customizing the rendering, and also creating another implementation for our Sling models. Burkhard?
Okay, thank you, Vlad. So in the next demo, I want to showcase how you can use these core components in your probably next project. For this, you can use Maven archetype for AEM, where you can build a skeleton for an AEM application. So what you have to do is get the font a little bit bigger. Yeah, just execute this archetype generate goal together with these parameters. This project is also hosted on GitHub. You will find the link to this archetype repository in the slides also. So I'm using here the latest 12 snapshot version, so that this is not currently released. Although we will do this, I think, right after this conference. So if I execute this on a command line, yeah, you get a multi-module project. I did this already, and so you have here one core bundle which is getting installed, and you have some integration tests and also two content packages. One is related to the components, which are placed in UI apps, and you get also a little bit of example content. So you can then just install this via the auto install package ID, and yeah, I switch to the instance. Yeah, if you install this, yeah, two content packages get installed via the content package manager. So one is related to the components. If I go here to the component console, I can choose this group, and the other one is the core components demo form. So these are currently all components we declare as stable and are currently part of our released version of the core components. And if I go here into the detail of one of the components, you also see this proxy pattern, so that this custom component of your project inherits the core components via the Sling resource supertype. This demo, or this archetype, is also generating some useful content policy and a raw editable template feature. So as you can see here, this is an initial editable template which is going to be created as example, and also for the responsive layout container you have a default content policy which allow this core components inside of your demo application. So you can then go here and create the special content policy for each component. And in the example content, you see them also in action. Then here's the basic structure. And in the English page, we have, for each component, we have one instance created. Additionally, there's also a Hello World component, which is not related to core component, but just to give you a basic understanding how you can develop more than the core components inside of your Maven project. All right. So with that, I'm going back to the slides.
Okay, so in order to review, we think one of the major changes of the core components related to the foundation components is the fact that we've gone open. They are now published on GitHub under a Apache 2.0 license, as opposed to the foundation components where you had no access to their source code. You could still see them and the scripts in JCR, but you could not have access to the source code. You could not contribute there or come with your own fixes for issues that you can't wait for us to fix. But at the same time, both of them are still being supported by Adobe. So you get the best of the two worlds. You get open implementation, something that you can customize, and also support for what's released for these components. Also, we tried really hard, and we are continuing to do that, to create better documentation and to create tests, both unit tests, because with the new technology we are separating the rendering from the model, and it's making it a lot easier to just do unit tests for the models. We've been using AEM mocks as well, which we encourage along with Sling mocks to use in your projects. We are also providing integration tests, and not just simple HTTP tests which just check some output, but we provided more complex tests which are testing both how the components are being rendered on the client publishing side, but also we are testing the authoring capabilities of the components. This is enabled by using Hops.js for testing. And technology-wise, we've introduced versioning with the core components. This, we think, will allow us in time to evolve them without breaking the customer's implementations on top of these components. It also allows customers and partners such as you to have multiple websites which are using different versions of the core components, saying that you are starting on 6.3 with version 1 of the core components, and you are developing a website, but then later on, when we launch new versions of the core components, you want to create a new site, you're going to use probably the newer versions, right? Well, the thing is, with versioning, you should be safe to install a new version of the core components And you will also have the older versions, but you get all the goodies with the new versions without breaking your existing implementations. Also, we've moved from a mix of mostly JSP and some HTL to HTL. We changed the way that we annotate our markup with classes to use more standardized BEM notation. We can also get an export of the data in your page in JSON by using the Sling model exporter. And since we switched to HTL, of course, XSS protection is provided out of the box. Also, for the authoring experience, we are showing off all the new features in Touch UI with Coral 3 support throughout all the components. Burkhard?
Yeah, so where you can get started from here. First, of course, you can just play with the demo we retail, which is shipped with AEM 6.3, as already shown during our demo session. And on the public GitHub, you will find also a separate branch for this demo where you can step into. This will just take you 5 minutes just to give an impression how the things are working. Then, if you hopefully say, yeah, I want to use this core components in my next project, you can just go ahead and use this AEM project archetype. There's also an alternative which is based on Lazybones, which was created by Justin, which is a more template-based approach. Maybe we can show this also together tomorrow when we have our playground sessions, and create a new project based on AEM 6.3. And if you have an existing project which just got merged to or upgraded to 6.3, and you are not able to create a new project from scratch, of course you can install the content package of our latest released version. You can download them from our GitHub page and create all the proxy components by hand for yourself, and only for these components you really want to use into your project, which is a little bit more effort, but you should be fine within 1 hour. So in our last slide, I really want to ask you to give us feedback, because we as engineers at Adobe, we don't really work on real-world customer projects, and that's why it's for us very important to get feedback from the field, from people who are really involved into a customer project, to see their requirements. And we have tomorrow this playground session, and it would be fine if you can get in touch doing that. And also via our public GitHub page, you can just create issues. It doesn't have to be bugs. It can just be a missing feature you think would be useful. There are already currently some open issue where we are discussing internally how we want to fulfill these requirements. And last but not least, of course, you can also provide code contributions with new components you think might be useful for the core components, and create a pull request on our public GitHub account. We have a wiki page and also a markdown file which shows you what you have to be care of when you start contributing to our project. So, and now we are open for questions.
If there are any questions.
Over there, Philip. On the right-hand side, Philip. Okay, Masood.
Hello? Oh, yes. I just had a question regarding the scope a little bit. I think, first of all, it's a great project. But regarding the CSS, is it that these components are just sort of like blank and that we use the proxy pattern and then give it a full-fledged look and feel as implementing it in a project, or is it supposed to be already responsive and with all the look and feel in this project already?
So we think that it might be not useful to provide a default styling with the core components. We start doing that, but we got already feedback from our internal consultants. They told us it's just confusing because every styling is different. On a project, the responsive part is only provided by the responsive grid, which is part of AEM. And you have now this BAM notation with the upcoming release, where you can really customize each element on your needs. The current released version uses a more bootstrap approach of styling, but this will change into this BAM notation.
Also, we are trying to provide a minimal client lib, that means JavaScript and CSS, so that the basic functionalities of the components are working. So if we might need to provide a small snippet, we are doing that. But other than that, we don't want to provide the default style like Burkhard said. That's up to you to customize. We just want to provide the framework so that you can know that you can address almost all parts of the markup and customize it to your needs.
Thank you. Any other questions in the very back?
Hello. So probably not the question, but the addition to that information, probably it would be useful to see the wiki page or on GitHub the documentation. As far as I remember, the advice was that there is a basic markup already, and you can change HTML tag, for example, but you can apply simply CSS without changing HTML itself. I guess that's probably was the question. Without styling, but you can write only client libs and you will get the look and feel already.
Yeah. Right.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, there's one in the middle center.
Hello. Thank you for the presentation. It's very nice. But I had a question. Is this tool or set of components dependent on any AAM specific that is not open source? Or can you, for example, use these components in a Sling system without having any of the AAM tools inside it?
Part of it can probably use just on top of Sling, but of course something like the edit dialogues or so on will not work. But I think the Sling models, we use some internal APIs there as well, so you have to use it with AEM 6.3.
In general, wherever we use any of the WCM features, that's mostly AEM specific. So if you want to use for example, the list component, which is showing up a list of pages based on a root path, that's using the page manager WCM code. So you're not going to be able to use that in Sling, but you could provide something similar for Sling, and why not? If at some point somebody would want to diverge a bit and make them let's say more generic, they're open source.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the presentation. I just wanted to ask, what is the future roadmap of these components? As I see, there are very few form components which are not sufficient for a production project. So what is the plan? When do we get more comprehensive components so that we can actually use these in a project?
Yeah, we have an internal roadmap of future components, and there will be also enhancement to the form components. For example, like a validation framework we want to introduce with the core components. Currently, there's only a front-end validation, but we want also to get rid of the dependency to the old foundation components. That's why we are planning an own validation framework. So there will be a new release pretty soon with this BAM notation and also with some additional enhancements. And for the upcoming GA release of AEM, we are planning, I think, up to 7 to 8 new components. But of course, if you start to contribute, it could be more.
Thank you. Any other questions? I think there happened another one, or? Okay. So if there are no more questions, you either address your questions later on then. So thank you, Burkhard and Vlad, for your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.